As we near the end of the semester, there's not a lot of time to give an extensive consideration of the topics before us. It's more as you're preparing for your final exam and as you're doing your final projects that there's kind of a cursory consideration of these topics. So the topic here for today is animal rights, and thus the shooting here is being done from horseback, just as a combining of the motif of using archery, shooting to hit the target, and that being the target of the good, the right, and the ought, and animals. So just a reminder before we get into this, the final exam is all about analysis of a moral dilemma, one of 5, from the standpoint of each of the 3 primary theories. That's what you're going to be doing. So the first thing you're going to do is examine the dilemma you're given on the day of the final exam from the standpoint of utilitarianism, and you're going to address the theory that looks at things based on outcomes, not based on what kind of duties I may owe or what is the morally right thing to do, but it's just concerned with outcomes. Thus this GGGN, the greatest good for the greatest number, on the basis of pleasure, primarily if we're talking about Jeremy Bentham's approach to utilitarianism, or on the basis of happiness, defined as the combination of both the pleasures of the body and also the pleasures of the mind, if we approach things from John Stuart Mill's perspective. So it looks not towards the act itself, but towards its results. It's important for you to remember that. Okay, the second approach that you're going to be taking and analyzing this dilemma from is from the standpoint of deontology, Kant's theory. And so you're dealing with duty. Deontology, I'll remind you, means the study of duty. And duty is determined by, number 1, the employment of a goodwill. You have to start with a goodwill. And then you use the first categorical imperative, which is a principle of universalizability. Can I recommend my way of reasoning to everybody else who finds themselves in the moral circumstances I'm in right now? Can I say, you should make your decisions the way that I made my decision? And then the second formulation of the categorical imperative, which is sometimes called the practical imperative, is the idea that we must always treat humanity, whether in the person of ourself or in the person of another, as an end and never as a means only. So you're going to approach your analysis of this dilemma when you do it deontologically with those 3 things in mind. Lastly, you've got to do a virtue ethics analysis. So the first 2 ways of analyzing are considering what do I do. They're concerned with ethics of conduct. But the latter one is ethics of character, and it's what does it look like for me to be a woman of virtue or a man of virtue. So here it says that it decides on the basis of being a virtuous woman or a virtuous man. Certain virtues need to be mentioned in your analysis. I don't know what they'll be. Perhaps it's honesty, perhaps it's loyalty, perhaps it's courage. But you need to mention certain virtues that would be applicable in this situation. And then eudaimonia is the ultimate goal, what you're aiming for, the well-being or flourishing of the moral agent making the decisions, and also others secondarily. And it's important, I think, here to mention also the idea of habituation in virtue, that you make it a habit to do the morally right thing. Okay. So before we get into our topic, I want to say for those of you working on a TED Talk, I've gone over already what goes on with papers, but with a TED Talk, here's the place where you submit it online. You can record it here, or you could record it using other software, but Canvas has the means for you to be able to do so. You go under Assignments, under Final Project TED Talk, and then you go down here. You can see that there's File Upload, there's Text Entry, and then there's Media. And you're going to click on Media, and then you have the opportunity to record or upload media. So preferably, you'll record it there. You can upload it there if you would rather. All right. Okay, so that'll allow us to get into our topic, which is animal rights. So when we speak of animal rights, some of the things that are at the forefront of people's minds today are factory farming, where animals are in very crowded conditions and there are incredible numbers of them in one place, and they're not really being treated in any kind of a humane fashion. And so all we want from them is what they can give us, be it the production of eggs if we're talking of chickens, or the production of meat if we're talking an animal going to the slaughter. Factory farming applies, I guess, a little bit with dairy cattle, especially if we're talking with a large very, very large number of animals, potentially. But it's more often if we're talking about animals being used for meat or for eggs. Veal calves are one of the most disturbing phenomena as far as how they're raised. If you're not aware, veal is called the other white meat as opposed to pork being a white meat. And so in order to have it be the other white meat, it has to be raised without there being certain vitamins. It's therefore kept from sunshine. It doesn't get the effect of the sun, and it's nursed, or not, it's not actually nursed, but it's given a liquid diet from the time that it's born. And so the effect of not being out in the sunshine and being on this liquid diet all the time is that the veal calves have scours. Scours is essentially what we would call dysentery in human beings. They just have constant diarrhea running out of them. And there's certainly no warmth or affection being given to them by their mothers, by the cows, because they've been taken away from the cow very quickly. And they're in the dark, and they're only being allowed to have this liquid diet. And they're just young, and then they're butchered while they're young. And so to see the raising of veal calves is pretty demoralizing. Animal testing is a concern, and that's the concern of the video that you've seen from the Big Questions TV show from England. Animal testing and certain parameters for animal testing are big concerns when we're talking about animal rights. Pig farming is something where pigs are often kept in cement pens. A pig has a natural desire to root. That's the kind of creature it is. If you put a bunch of pigs in a field, they will basically turn that field all up for you if you fence them in. And so you won't have to take and plow the field. The pigs will turn over all of the topsoil. So they cannot root, although that's a natural thing for them. And oftentimes, I've been in pig farms where the smell of the ammonia from the urine of the pigs is just overwhelming. It makes your eyes water. So pig farming can oftentimes be inhumane. Then when we turn towards our oceans, the phenomena of ghost nets that are left, nets that are no longer in use, floating in the sea and animals getting caught in them and trapped. And then trawling nets that are bottom-dragging trawling nets, which oftentimes capture in them dolphins and porpoises, animals that cannot get the air that they need out of the water. There's all kinds of concerns when we start talking about animal rights. Those are just some of the ones that come to mind. So I want to ask, what did you think of the Big Questions video on animal rights, and which side of the argument did you find more persuasive? One side was arguing for animal testing when it could save human lives or provide for helpful data as far as human well-being, and was willing to do experimentation on animals in order to obtain that. And the other side was opposed to that. And there's strong arguments coming from both directions. So the questions that are associated with this issue are, do animals have instrumental value only? Or do they have intrinsic worth like we think humans have? Do animals have rights of any sort? And if they do have rights, where does that come from? Who confers the notion of them having right on them? Do we owe them any moral respect or concern at all? I think most of us would say yes, we do. We certainly ought not to cause pain unnecessarily to them. There's a lot of things we would put on the list as far as moral respect or concern towards animals. Is it morally permissible to experiment on animals, to raise and kill them for food, and the process to cause them unnecessary pain or suffering? I don't think any of my students that I've ever had has said it'd be okay to cause them unnecessary pain or suffering. This is from Vaughan. He produces books for ethics courses, and he says, moral agents are beings who can make moral judgments and act according to moral reasons or principles. So the basic claim is that since all or most animals are not persons or moral agents, they can have no moral standing. Roger Scruton was one of the people that you read who made that claim. They simply lack the necessary property to have that. One of Aristotle's pupils, Theophrastus, argued against eating meat on the grounds that it robbed animals of life and was therefore unjust. He argued that non-human animals can reason, sense, and feel just as human beings do. Theophrastus did not prevail, and it was Aristotle's position that human and non-human animals exist in different moral realms because the one is rational, meaning us, and the other not. That was the primary view of how things are when it comes to moral rights in the West, and it's been that for nearly 2,000 years. So Marianne Warren, remember Marianne Warren was the lady who had argued with regard to abortion that there's a difference between being genetically a human being and being socially a human being. And she says human lives, one might say, have greater value than animal lives because they're worth more to their possessors. Humans have hopes, plans, and purposes that make them value continued existence. They know that if they cease to exist, there's things they lose out on. Animals apparently lack this forward-looking perspective. Well, I don't know if that's necessarily true. Anybody who has seen an animal trying to avoid being captured or taken down and be eaten by a predator looks like they would like to continue to keep on existing. So here's some questions for you to think about. The interests of human beings should be considered before the interests of other species. When you read Peter Singer, he would say that that's speciesism, right? But it's agree or disagree. Do you think that we should come first and as far as over other species? Is it sometimes morally permissible to cause non-human animals pain? Is there some sort of a ultimate good that could come out of that which would justify it in our eyes to do that? Agree or disagree? Is it morally wrong to eat non-human animals? This is a big debated issue, and we have vegetarians and vegans, and we have a lot of folks who are omnivorous. And so the omnivores oftentimes defend their position by saying that they have the wrong sort of teeth in their head for them to be vegetarians. They have the kinds of teeth in their head that animals that are omnivores have. They have the incisors that cut meat, and they have the canine teeth or the eye teeth that hold the meat for ripping and tearing. And they have molars like animals that graze on plants have also. But that's one of the defenses. Another one of the defenses is, the old saying with regard to animals, eyes in front likes to hunt, eyes on the side likes to hide. We seem to, as human beings, to have the morphology in our bodies of creatures that are hunters. We do. I mean, that's just a fact when we look at the animal world. So that's one of the pushbacks against the push in the direction of being vegetarian or vegan. People have convictions in this field from one direction or another, and you saw what Singer had to say about this. At the end of the day, it's not something that we can point to some higher standard and say, this proves that you ought to be a vegan or a vegetarian, or this proves that we ought to be omnivores and eat both meat and vegetable matter. So it's very much a contested area. Human beings have a moral duty to minimize the suffering they inflict on non-human animals. I would hope that every one of you would agree that that is the case, that we ought to minimize any suffering that animals would go through. Medical experiments on non-human animals are morally wrong, even if they provide benefits for humans, and that was the discussion that was in that Big Questions video. Agree or disagree? One of the big issues is, where can we ground animal rights? When we're dealing with a secular society, it's hard enough to ground human rights. So where are we going to give weight or significance to the claims that animals have certain rights? So here's some of the things that people raise. They can feel things. They are sentient to some degree. They are vulnerable. And oftentimes they are kind of in the position of a child. We have control over them, and they're looking for the humans to treat them well. They are sentient beings. They experience life, and they deserve a life. You think about chickens. Chickens are very social creatures that like to explore their environment. And oftentimes we're talking about factory farming. We have 4 or 5 of them stuffed into a tiny little cage where their food and water comes through in conveyor belt kind of fashion. And they literally sometimes die and squish, their bodies squish through the bars. There's no place for them to go. They're kept in certainly inhumane conditions. And it seems like these creatures, that they deserve to have a life like other creatures do. Cruelty is a deficit. It's a vice. It's a deficit of compassion and empathy. That makes it a vice. It's not the mean between two extremes. It is the extreme. And so the man or the woman who's practicing cruelty to their horse or to their dog is a person who's involved in vice, in the opposite of virtue. Then there's an analogy from the animal to the human. We use, in fact, animal metaphors to speak about human beings. We talk about somebody being sly like a fox and so on. So we see certain things as far as characteristics of different animals that we project onto the human. And then we have domesticated them. So when we've domesticated them, then they've ceased knowing how to fend for themselves in the wild. And it seems, especially if we're dealing with domesticated animals, that there should be compassion towards them and a sense that we need to now fulfill their needs, especially when it comes to food. While all this is true, there's another side to this discussion. So I want you to consider the following. This is something that happened. I was in England working on my PhD when this took place. Lola and Isabella Couparas, two little girls, suffered arm wounds and facial injuries inflicted by a fox that had climbed into the infant's crib and bitten them. This happened at the family's home in Homerton, East London, at 10 p.m. on Saturday the 5th, June 2010. The mom came into the nursery and she saw that one of the children was bleeding, and she thought perhaps it had a bloody nose. When she went over towards the child, she turned and looked, and she saw that the other baby was bleeding as well, and found that there was a fox in one of the cribs, and the fox ran out the window. London has had the issue in the past of it being invaded by foxes in people's homes. So Pauline Couparas has been the subject, once this was made known, of inflammatory and aggressive posts online on sites such as Facebook and Twitter from people defending the urban fox. I kid you not. And some have said that the family dog attacked the children, that Mr. and Mrs. Couparas covered it up so that the animal would not have to be put down. But the problem is the couple do not have a dog. Others claim the family used the case as propaganda to bring back fox hunting. They have no links at all to hunting, never been involved with it at all. I mean, these are the kinds of things that were being said and that were out there abroad. The most disturbing thing of all was that after the efforts made to remove the urban foxes from East London, there were animal rights activists who started sporting bumper stickers that said, "Save a fox, kill a baby." I kid you not. So we have some pretty strange reactions on the part of certain human beings to some of these issues. And I want to say, somewhere between factory farming, animal experimentation, the raising of veal calves, and this absurd preference for the well-being of foxes to that of human babies, it seems somewhere between those things there must be a perspective from which to rightly view the issue of animal rights. And it would seem just by default that we would treat animals as kindly as we possibly can, according to what our convictions are with regard to the eating of animals, that if we do believe that it's okay or permissible to eat them, that they would be kept in humane conditions prior to being butchered, and they'd be butchered in the least painful fashion possible. But some of us are going to have very strong convictions that eating animals at all is not permissible. So we're going to need to understand that as we live here in this world, as human beings, we're going to have that we're on different sides of this issue.